UG20, I got 13K right now, about 13 and a half, that's good. Or says you'd like to customize your penalty checks, no more. UG20 is holding steady.
An Navy helicopter exploded off the coast of San Francisco. 8 crewmen are missing.
2 military aircraft have gone down after colliding just north of Hawaii's Oahu Island.
U.S. Marines and a U.S. sailor were killed today in the crash of a Super Stallion helicopter on the deadliest day for American forces since the start of the war.
5 people killed in 4 crashes in the course of 2 years. Has the worst safety record of any aircraft in the Navy.
Reporters don't have much of an incentive to write about this stuff except when it's a horror story. But then there's no follow-through. Well, what really happened?
Who am I supposed to be faithful to? Am I supposed to be faithful to a general or a politician? Where do your loyalties lie? My suggestion would be my loyalties lie to the Marines who go die on those aircraft.
He saw it happening and he called it out. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything to change it in time.
Lieutenant Wesley Van Dorn was 29 years old from Greensboro, North Carolina. Van Dorn was a 2007 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He was one of the Sea Dragon pilots. And Van Dorn was a father of 2.
Jax, why don't you help Dad?
He was, I always use the word magnetic.
Why don't you try one more time?
I met him and I was like, wow, there are people in the world that are actually awe-inspiring and you want to be around.
Wes had a great relationship with his enlisted guys. He took care of all of us. He was just really big on making sure that all of his people felt welcomed and felt like a family.
He was rambunctious. He was fun to be around. You're a better person because of your time spent with him. He'd talk to me about what we could do better. What can we do better to be better? And I think that was a question that racked his brain a lot. Because he wasn't somebody who half-assed anything. And that's what you should want to do, especially if your life's on the line every day.
Wes Van Dorn long dreamed of attending a service academy. He spent hours fishing with his grandfather, a West Point graduate.
This is 4th, 5th grade, and on into his high school picture.
He was 19 when his mother Susan dropped him off at the Naval Academy.
This is day 1, quite a day. He's thrilled here and he's a little thoughtful here, I would say. But he was very excited about his opportunity there.
Having been appointed as a midshipman in the United States Navy, do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and
It was a very moving experience as a parent. You felt that you had done your best to bring them to that point, and then you were turning them over to the military to let them continue to develop and grow as a human being in the way they wanted to.
So help you God.
After he got his wings, he said, "How do you think we should choose an airframe?" We decided together that the community that would allow for the best family life.
Come on, little Jackson guy, come on.
He decided that he wanted to be defined by his family.
Look who it is, it's Mommy.
And one of his other friends, who was in the 53 community at the time, told him that the hours he worked allowed him to be home for dinner most nights.
Was that fun?
That he would only deploy, once every couple of years. And so Wes put 53 as his first choice.
Helicopters are awesome. I mean, to make a school bus fly, lift off the ground, to beat the air into submission, it's a whole different glory than just making a jet go really fast and flying like a paper plane.
The two versions of this helicopter are practically identical. The Navy uses the MH-53E Sea Dragon. It drags heavy equipment through the water to sweep for underwater explosives. The Marines use the CH-53E Super Stallion to move people and gear for critical missions. The 53 dates back to the Cold War. It can require about 40 man-hours of maintenance for just 1 hour of flight time.
I have so many nights where you have cried and bled and sweat and cussed at this helicopter. The mentality in the MH-53 community is that we fight a battle against the helicopter. It basically means she never wants to fly. And there'd be that day, that one glorious, beautiful sunset bluebird day where you would get 4 53s all fired up at one time, and everyone comes and lines the hangars, and everybody's got their phones out. The sight to just watch these 4 giant machines all at once just rise up, all of a sudden become this agile, powerful behemoth that's just effortlessly flying through the sky. It's a sign of just strength.
We had actually visited several times in Norfolk. We were walking around and looking at the helicopter, and we had his son with us. And I said to Wes, do they ever have a day when you can fly your family and take us for a ride in the helicopter? And I will never forget that, because Wes turned to me and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Mama, I would never take you up in this piece of crap." And I just looked back at him and I didn't know what to say, because that was what he was flying.
The Navy 53s entered service in 1986. In 2010, when Van Dorn checked into his squadron, known as HM-14, the helicopters were worn out and should have been retired.
The Navy in the late 90s had started to come up with a plan to replace these helicopters. And then when that plan goes out the window, it's kind of like they're in limbo.
The Navy tried new ships, minesweeping gear, and towing with less powerful helicopters. Nothing worked as planned, so they were stuck with the 53. And because the relic helicopter was destined to be replaced, money for spare parts and maintenance was hard to come by.
Commanding officers of the squadron are applying pressure down on these guys to keep the aircraft going with fewer and fewer resources. And so out of that, all these bad habits formed in which guys were taking shortcuts. And that's when this culture of just get her done kind of took hold.
When I checked into HM-14, I was about as green as it comes to naval aviation. Everybody has these preconceived notions of what aircraft maintenance is, you know, because you've changed a tire on a car or changed your oil. It's not what it is. There's a million preset publications that are figured out by engineers, and they've decided this is the way that you're going to work on this aircraft. So, to put it mildly, we didn't do that. It kind of always turned into a flight hours first, safety second kind of a thing. And it was kind of one of those, as long as nothing messed up along the way, and as long as too large of a crowd didn't see it, it was okay.
The 53 has a serious accident more than twice as often as the average military aircraft. 3 went down in a 2-month span in 2012. Van Dorn's sister squadron lost one on a runway in Bahrain and another in a mountain ravine in Oman.
포항에서 주한미군 헬기가 불시착한 뒤 전소됐습니다.
Van Dorn's unit lost one too, in a radish field in Korea.
You have a string of crashes in a short amount of time that doesn't necessarily give you the warm and fuzzies inside. And you don't get the warm and fuzzies when you're on an aircraft and it's having these issues. And I knew aviation wasn't always the safest thing to do. But at that time I was young and I was wet behind the ears. I was just learning, so I didn't ask too many questions. But I really began to realize there were problems the summer of 2012.
HM-14 had to ferry 4 53s across the country to an exercise in San Diego.
The aircraft I was on kept getting main gearbox chips. It means the gears are coming apart. We left Norfolk, Virginia with 4 aircraft, and by the time we got to California, we only had 1 aircraft that was up and able to do the missions for that exercise. You know, it's not performing to the capability that was advertised to you. You know, it's, why are we having all these problems?
He would just come home and he'd have that frustrated look in his face. What he was most frustrated about was that he never got to fly. He would be on a flight schedule, he would go into work, he would sit there, and then he wouldn't get to fly because something would be broken. He would text me and keep me kind of updated and tell me how many hours late he was going to be that day. He didn't have a grand theory on why exactly they were happening, but they were little things that happened repeatedly that he thought was perhaps evidence of a bigger trend. The 2012 crash in Korea was the first time that Wes really put 2 and 2 together.
Van Dorn was one of the first on the scene. The Navy interviewed him when they opened their investigation.
All right, start out by saying your name.
All right, I'm Lieutenant Wes Van Dorn.
What was your take as far as working with the troops?
They're hard-working young kids. They at least start out motivated, but they're only going to do what's asked of them. And then senior enlisted, seems like they don't really care about their junior enlisted. And I think that's a huge issue in our squadron.
In his testimony, Van Dorn said he was worried that enlisted sailors were ignoring the step-by-step guides on how to care for the 53, books that sailors and Marines call the pubs.
Did you do the job per the pub? Well, yeah. Yeah, but did you do the job per the pub? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Well, no. Listen, guys, we all know that's not the pub. Why are you guys not doing it? Well, sir, it's a lot of work to do it that way. It's really hard. We've got planes to fly. We've got other stuff to do. Yeah. There's a reason why we have these pubs. And if our kids aren't being properly taught how to use them, what's the point?
So you're suggesting that the training failure, the cultural failure, has simply been allowed to perpetuate over time?
The officer leadership has been non-existent.
Van Dorn felt that senior officers didn't want to admit that there were problems at the squadron or with the 53s. According to military records, he submitted a memo to superiors saying, "Skipper after skipper has continued to fudge numbers because they didn't want to be the whistleblower."
You're fighting an uphill battle, and you're not getting the things you need, and you're expected to do more with less. And when you mix that in with poor maintenance, it's a recipe for disaster.
The first fatal crash in a 53E came in 1984. The helicopter broke apart as it was lifting a truck. 4 Marines died. A mechanic who recorded a tape about his concerns died in a crash 2 years later. Congress opened an investigation. By early 1987, 20 people had died in training accidents on the 53E.
A Navy helicopter exploded off the coast of San Francisco in heavy fog Monday. 8 crewmen are missing. Rescuers do not expect to find any survivors.
There was pieces of debris from the size of a quarter to as large as a Volkswagen.
The death toll ticked upward, both in the military and at the manufacturer.
CH-53E, or Super Stallion helicopter as it is called, crashed here at Sikorsky this morning, killing all 4 people on board. The helicopter went down during a test flight.
The helicopter full of Marines and 1 Navy sailor had gone down. The sailor and 30 U.S. Marines were killed.
The CH-53 Super Stallion, like this one, was
31 dead in a single crash. It made for the deadliest day for U.S. troops in the entire Iraq War. 25 fatal accidents. Some were the fault of the pilot, and others the helicopter. By the end of 2013, over 100 service members had been killed on the 53E, not one the result of enemy fire.
The burden of everything that he saw going on weighed heavily on Wes. He felt like no matter what he said or what he wrote or who he complained to, nothing was changing.
If anyone should care about what's happening on that aircraft, it should be me and the other pilots, I think. It makes sense to me, because I'm the one who's going to get in it and have something terrible happen if it doesn't go right.
Tens of millions of Americans face a day of dangerously cold weather.
Sub-zero temperatures blanketing so much of our country. Take a look at these wind chills.
Minus 40 or even worse, and that's causing all sorts of problems, including burst pipes and power outages. And this is no...
Besides the cold, it was supposed to be a routine morning. If the sailors of HM-14 could get their helicopters in the air, they'd fly a run-of-the-mill mine-sweeping exercise.
When I showed up at the squadron, found out one of the aircrew members, their pipes had burst at their house, so I filled in because I was one of the only available crewmen at the squadron at that time.
Dylan Boone joined air crewman Brian Collins, crew chief Justin Godfrey, co-pilot Sean Snyder, with Van Dorn in the pilot seat. Mechanic Chris Hummey came in early and checked to be sure the freezing temperatures weren't causing extra problems for the helicopters.
Normal troubleshooting stuff comes up. You know, this light popped on, this circuit breaker pops this, check this, check this. Normal stuff. But everything appeared to be fine. I had a pretty good rapport with Lieutenant Van Dorn. He just wanted to know it was good. He was like, homie, just tell me shit's good. You're qualified, I trust you. Roger that, sir, shit's good, shit's good. And I slapped him on the back, and I turned around and I got out of the cockpit and I walked off the aircraft, and it flew away.
I'll tell you what, we're going to stop there at 15 feet. We got plenty of power coming, 75. You're good? Crash center in the water. Roger, easy forward,
It was just a regular training mission. I guess that's where some of my anger lies. Because it could have been avoided. Should have been avoided. I felt some heat on my neck and turned around and saw that we had flames and smoke in the cabin. It was like a flamethrower that was just eating everything in its path. And by the time you know it, you're just wishing for the fire to go out, and it's not, and you're just trying to get some air and you can't. And in a weird sadistic way, you're thankful that it finally hit something, because it's either you're gonna drown or the fire's gonna be put out by the water. And like that was your escape, is a wreck. I woke up probably about 20 seconds later, about 20 feet underwater with the aircraft, and I swam to the surface. The water was 40 degrees. Could hear screams in the distance, didn't know from who. Eventually, we finally popped a smoke, and our sister aircraft came over and started radioing for help.
The debris field covered the area of 4 football fields, but most of the helicopter quickly sank. The remnants of the chopper known as Vulcan 543.
One of the newer guys to the squadron comes in and he says 4 3s in the water. I didn't even turn around, and I was like, say what? And he said 4 3s in the water. And then you just start panicking. Did I do this? You know, did I tell him that shit was good and it wasn't? And you know you did it right, you don't know. Because it's a crash. There's a helicopter that crashed into the ocean on a day that it's 10 below zero, and you have this mental picture of these men freezing in the coldest day that
is the longest 45 minutes of my life. It's fucking cold.
I got a text message, just said, "Is Wes okay? We heard that a 53 went down."
We're back on the air now with breaking news, where we've learned a military helicopter has gone down off the coast. 5 people on board, we're told.
The helicopter went down about 18 nautical miles off the Virginia Beach coast. 4 of the 5 helicopter crew members were already en route to Centera Norfolk General Hospital.
Nicole texted me 911. I knew I needed to call her. And we just got in the car and started driving to Virginia Beach.
I asked the hospital administrator to come back in, and I looked her in the eyes and I said, I see these chaplains walking by. I don't know what they're here for. I've been told that my husband is in surgery. But God help you if he's near me and I don't get to see him and he dies. She came back a minute or two later and she said, "Come with me." They let me hold his hand and lay my head in his chest. And then I saw I think he was a neurologist because he had a little flashlight in his hand and he kept going like this in Wes's eyes.
Hey, Bob.
And then he kind of looked at the other doctors, and that's when I knew. I laid on him for the next 7 hours waiting for his parents to arrive. And that was when the Navy walked in to notify me that he had been in a helicopter crash.
Now we turn our attention to that deadly helicopter crash. Today is a struggle for the community.
Just kind of sitting there numb. My wife came home and I was sitting in basically the dark. And I just couldn't hold it back. I just started bawling like a child. You know, I just remember saying over and over again, they're dead, they're hurt, they're dead, they're hurt. I don't know if I did it. It could have been me. What if I did it? The mechanic in you, the perfectionist in you, you just can't stop thinking about, could I have stopped this? Could I have changed something that made this different?
It would be 8 months before Hummy knew for sure that he wasn't at fault. All he knew then was that 3 sailors had died in the crash. Air crewman Brian Collins from Truckee, California, was 25. He'd just celebrated his first wedding anniversary. Co-pilot Sean Snyder, also from California, was 39 and the father of 4. He was found with the wreckage a week after the accident. Van Dorn died a month shy of his 30th birthday. At the Naval Academy's Memorial Hall, which commemorates graduates who died in the line of duty, Van Dorn's name was etched into the wall. He was the first in his class to die.
Hey Scott, it's Mike Hicksonbaugh, the pilot. I left a message on your cell. I was sitting at my desk on January 8th, 2014, and an alert goes out on Twitter from the Navy saying that a helicopter had crashed off the coast of Virginia.
Just 2 months earlier, military reporter Mike Hicksonbaugh had written his first major article on the 53. It detailed its history and problems. He'd interviewed Navy Captain Todd Flannery, the East Coast top helicopter pilot.
And he said, "We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, but we're heading in the right direction."
A military helicopter has gone down off the coast.
So when that alert came through, you know, the thoughts rushing through my mind are going back to my interview with Flannery just 2 months earlier when he's telling me that all of the problems that they've had with these helicopters, all of the cultural issues, the leadership problems, the maintenance issues, and, you know, my mind is racing thinking, what happened here?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Todd Flannery, Commander Helicopter Sea Combat Wing Atlantic. I'm joined by...
I remember asking Flannery that day.
Today has definitely been a tough day on all of us.
Whether he felt like these aircraft were safe.
Do you have any concerns about the safety of these aircraft? No, I don't. I do not.
And even on that day, he maintained that, yes, you know, I believe that these are safe aircraft. I started working on a story that, in much more detail than I had previously done, told the story of the Sea Dragon. It was about a month after the crash when it published.
The front page spread caught the attention of Nicole Van Dorn.
He wasn't just accepting the facts given to him by the Navy at face value. He was inquisitive. Maybe he's willing to break the mold. Someone who's professional enough to not just chase a story that isn't there, but if there is truth to it, I also want someone who's not afraid to dig deeper.
It was a day or two after that, late one evening, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. and it was Nicole Van Dorn.
My husband expressed to me before he died that he was really worried about things going on in the squadron, and he kept copious records, and I don't know if I have anything, but I also need a place to bring it all.
The text sent chills up my spine. It's a tragedy. It's a guy who sees a problem, commits to trying to fix it, and the problem kills him.
I guess from the very beginning, I assumed that if I wanted answers, really transparent, truthful answers, I was going to have to get them myself. Once the helicopter was recovered and it was in a hangar, I said, I want to see it. I want to know what actually caused the crash. If it was Wes's fault, I want to know it was Wes's fault. If it was one of the air crewmen's fault, I want to know. If it was a failing of the airframe, I want to know.
I care not to speculate on that.
To get the answers she was seeking, Nicole pressed Captain Flannery for updates.
He was very kind, and he called me a lot. And when I went to see the wreckage, he said, the way it's looking is that Wes was not at fault. I want you to know that to help you rest easy, that he did nothing wrong, that it was just a freak accident. That's where the truth stopped for me, because after everything that Wes had said to me and everything that I knew about the airframe, there was just no way in my mind that it could have just been a freak accident.
Navy investigators ruled out problems with the engines, swash plate, and tail rotor. Issues that had plagued the 53 in the past.
I took a picture of where I thought everything went wrong. One of these zip ties, that's what started everything.
A confidential Navy report found that a simple plastic zip tie unleashed the unlikely chain of events. The tiny nylon strap secured a bundle of electrical wires near a metal fuel tube. Under constant vibration during flight, the zip tie cut away the wire's protective insulation and wore a hole in the fuel line. Through that tiny hole, a pressurized mist of jet fuel escaped into the cabin and arced with the exposed wires.
So the fire took place here. The report tells you there was a fireball that happened. You can see how close to the cockpit it is, relatively compared to the size of the helicopter.
Is there no way of just going? I asked the captain again, are you confident in the safety of this aircraft? And he said yes.
Admittedly, it is an aging aircraft and requires extensive maintenance, but continues to perform a vital mission that no other helicopter in the U.S. military inventory can accomplish.
Very hard to think that your son lost his life because of cracked wiring and a zip tie.
The Navy ordered the inspection of all 53s for signs of chafing. After the first anniversary of the crash, Wes Van Dorn's story went national.
Now to an NBC News investigation in partnership with the Virginian Pilot newspaper and the Berkeley Investigative Reporting Program.
Captain Todd Flannery was in charge of Van Dorn's Sea Dragon squadron. He took us inside one of the huge helicopters.
But in the case of the Sea Dragon, it has the worst safety record of any aircraft in the Navy.
It does.
5 people killed in 4 crashes in the course of 2 years.
Yes.
Those are odds I don't think most of us would want to take.
They are not good. Those numbers are not good at all.
I mean, how many crashes do we have to have?
We can't have another crash. We just can't.
In the days after the story was published, several people kind of came out of the woodwork. One of the sources provided documents that showed that the wiring and fuel line problems hadn't been fixed, the very kind that caused the crash. These aircraft were still flying, and nothing had changed.
I got up in the morning, I'm having a cup of coffee, and I read this article, and I'm like, okay, that's a Marine airplane, we have a problem. And I called my Navy counterparts and said, we have a problem here, and we need to get it fixed.
No one was more surprised to learn about the failed inspection effort than Lieutenant General John Davis. He was named the Marine Corps' top aviator 5 months after Van Dorn's crash. He was responsible for the fleet of Marine 53s. Now retired, he was the only senior officer willing to be interviewed for this film.
Tried not to lose my composure, but I was unhappy. I was concerned. You know, from hey, we're good to we're not so good. An independent person out there taking pictures found things that weren't in line with what we thought, but people thought the standard should be. And so, yeah, I wanted facts, I wanted data, I wanted it quickly.
Davis grounded the fleet. Sailors and Marines spent months looking for signs of chafing, while pilots were on the sidelines.
No one's gonna fly until we find out if we got a problem out there in the fleet, which was the responsible thing to do. Stop, everybody stop. And no one in the Marine Corps faulted me for that, nobody.
But there's clear evidence that the Navy and Marines knew for decades, even when the 53 was still in prototype stage, that there was another problem. The type of wiring on the helicopters was a serious threat.
This is a piece of Kapton insulated wire. It's still made to this day and flies in over a third of the world's commercial planes.
The BBC used the Navy's research when it published a report on a wiring type known as Kapton.
Kapton is best when young. It's featherweight, the thickness of only about 3 human hairs, flame-resistant, tough. That was the good news. And this is the bad. The Kapton insulation can explode like a firework if it's chafed and rubs against metal.
Particularly bad for the Navy, tests showed that the problems get worse in wet environments.
Kapton insulation burned to a crisp.
In the late 80s, the Navy decided to discontinue the use of Kapton wire in its aircraft. But the ban was a half measure. It applied only to new 53s and repairs, not to the 151 helicopters built with Kapton.
If everybody knows that this wiring insulation is bad, it shouldn't be used, then everybody that's in the chain of it should know better and should not let it happen.
Louis Francke argued before the Supreme Court in a case involving an earlier version of the 53. He sued the manufacturer, claiming a design flaw led to a pilot's death.
You can't sue the military for things that go wrong.
Hand salute.
Some, lieutenant says, go run over that hill and you get shot. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. It should have said run over the other hill and you wouldn't get shot. You can't sue for that. We all accept that. But the products are something else.
More arcing and burning occurred, which re-tripped this breaker and caused 4 more to trip.
They're not volunteering to be killed by their own military or the military products they're supplied.
Francke lost the case. The court found in favor of the manufacturer. Like the military, government contractors were now immune as long as they followed design specs and the government had knowledge of potential dangers.
The families who have lost a loved one because of a defective military product have essentially no recourse. They are the least powerful to ever stop using it or have something changed. The game is rigged. It's rigged against them. The people who are really hurt have no power.
Should he still be alive?
Sure, of course he should be. I mean, he should be alive because that product shouldn't have that insulation that causes that problem. Could he have been killed by something else? Maybe, but that's not what did it. What did it is a history of people ignoring what needed to be done. and should have been fixed.
Court records show that Sikorsky, the manufacturer, twice recommended replacing Kapton on the 53 after learning of safety issues. That was more than 3 decades before Van Dorn's crash. After a third proposal, the Navy decided to explore removal. Navy safety records reveal that Kapton has been involved in more than 50 incidents on the aircraft. One report from 1999 foreshadowed Van Dorn's accident.
It's almost as if I'm reading the safety investigation report from Wes's crash. The location of the hole on the pipe indicates chafing had occurred during normal aircraft vibrations in flight.
One of the plastic zip ties wrapped around the wire bundle, rubbed against the pipe. Over an unknown period of time, these components became soaked with fuel and they eventually ignited. Well, I'm glad the damage was minor for them. I wish that would have been our case. I would take that over. That's shitty. Why wasn't this, was this ever addressed? I don't think so. That was 15 years.
The investigation into Boone and Van Dorn's crash never mentions Kapton. The maintenance log shows that some of the wiring had been replaced, though not at the site of the explosion.
Why would it have still been on that MH-53E that crashed in Virginia?
I don't know. I don't know the why, and I didn't know about Kapton wiring problems per se. I knew we had a plan to replace our Kapton wiring by 2019.
After we interviewed General Davis, we found a Navy memo from 2009 that sounded the alarm about Kapton's dangers. Senior officers signed the document, approving a plan to only gradually replace Kapton. One of the signatures belonged to General Davis. We went back to him, and Davis said he doesn't recall the memo, but he said that replacing Kapton in phases and implementing 2 other safety measures seemed reasonable. Despite the tests, warnings, and decades of knowledge, the Navy said it never had enough money to replace all the wiring in the 53s.
One of the things Captain Flannery told me when I sat down with him back in 2013 was that the Sea Dragon for several years had been what he called a bill payer. So in other words, funding to, say, replace Kapton wiring would be rerouted someplace else. Because the Sea Dragons were going to go away. And so that money would be put to some other need, some other mission, some other more high-profile platform.
The Navy called Kapton the highest-ranked safety risk in the fleet. But just months before Van Dorn's crash, the Pentagon diverted funds away from Kapton replacement, further delaying the effort to remove the deadly wiring.
How dare you? It's just irresponsible. I just don't see how you can not maintain the military equipment that all of these fine people's lives depend on to the utmost of our ability.
I look at the moon that looks like a boat. My dad's arms are like a boat, too.
I think any widow would tell you that it doesn't get easier. The sting is still the same.
My dad looks at me, and I climb onto his lap.
I've had something to connect with Wes through, which is trying to finish his work and trying to get his voice out there.
How will you know when your work now is complete?
I think I'll know that it's complete when people stop coming to me with concerns.
Love you too.
I read the full story in the Virginia pilot. I was like, Van Dorn, yeah, I remember that accident, and said, hey, this may be more than just a Navy issue. This is maybe a 53-wide issue across both communities, the Marine Corps and the Navy. And that kind of prompted me to contact Mike and then get in touch with Nicole after that.
Captain James Skelton flew the Marine version of the 53 for 7 years. As a quality assurance officer, he kept a sharp eye on maintenance and safety, and he found himself at odds with leaders primarily focused on getting aircraft in the air.
In the infantry, you can smash a guy for complaining. Boo-hoo, cry me a river, I don't give a damn, get your ass back out on the front line. That's fine, that's how it's supposed to be. But if you're in the aviation environment, it doesn't work that way. The lowest guy should be able to bring up the biggest problem to anyone he needs to bring it up to. When you start out as a pilot, you're young. You're a young, impressionable Marine, you're a first lieutenant. You're definitely in a position where you're not going to question authority. Once you get a little bit older, once you become a helicopter aircraft commander, there's responsibilities imparted on you that are more than just saying yes, sir. It's not that you don't say yes, sir, because you definitely do, and I firmly believe in that, but you're not just a yes man at that point. Especially in my ability as a quality assurance officer, I'm responsible for the ultimate safety of that helicopter and the Marines that get on it. You have to have the folks who will stop something if there's a train wreck about to happen.
Enlisted Marines in Skelton's unit complained about a culture that chose flight hours over safety. They said they were belittled, humiliated, and slapped down when they tried to point out safety problems. More than a dozen wrote letters about their concerns and dropped them off on Skelton's desk.
If they have to come to me as a captain in a different department, then there's a serious problem. I decided I was going to write my own letter, and I was going to run it up the chain of command. What I anticipated would be, okay, let's take a time out. Let's figure out what's happening here. Why are these guys so upset? It became more of a admonishment from the senior leadership that we were wrong, that there was mutiny going on in the lower ranks, and that we needed to pull our head out of our asses, basically, and get back out there and do what we're told.
I've seen this.
You have?
Yeah.
Have you seen the whole pack there?
I remember asking questions about this note. I wanted to kind of get to the bottom of whether these are valid or not. People couldn't corroborate that as far as, those are accurate complaints, could be the complaints of a young guy out there in one unit.
There's like a dozen young guys that are complaining about it.
Yeah, I only saw skeletons. Yeah. But I think bottom line is we needed to fix the 53 community. What are they saying now? Really, to me, would be, okay, got it. We have a problem then. Are they fixed now? Yes or no? I believe they are fixed now. So it's easy to go, hey, yep, things suck, right? So the hard part is figuring out a thoughtful way forward, getting that funded and driving it home, which is exactly what the Marine Corps is doing right now.
It was depressing to walk all the way back to your shop and have to go tell those Marines that their concerns were not going to be listened to. I was disgusted by it. I'm disgusted by it to this day. Not only was I disgusted with one or two individuals, I was disgusted with an entire unit. This isn't about me. This is about those young Marines who get on that aircraft. They were failed.
The kind of situation that you are seeing with the helicopters is very typical of things I've seen over the years. It is basically a predictable consequence of a screwed up priority system. Not predictable, inevitable. And because it is inevitable, you can see it ahead of time, and when you continue this behavior into the future, it basically boils down to malice aforethought.
When Chuck Spinney talks about defense cost overruns, Congress listens, and so do his Pentagon bosses.
Chuck Spinney spent more than 25 years as an analyst in the Pentagon.
We projected that our modernization costs in 1982 would be here. They actually turned out to be here. That's a mismatch of 100%. Now, we can't change this cost.
In the early 80s, he briefed Congress on how Pentagon spending was impacting readiness and led to part shortages, disgruntled maintenance crews, and pilots who were short on flight time. 30 years later, Van Dorn still wrestled with the same problems.
If what you're saying is true, then we not only have a budget problem, but I think that we frankly have a major problem in national defense.
The number one priority in the Pentagon is to pump up the budgets that are associated with the development and purchasing of new weapons. Now, if you pump those up, you basically try to hold down the money that's spent on operating existing weapons in terms of readiness, training, buying spare parts, maintenance, things like that. And in the case of the CH-53s, maybe one of those cutbacks was saying, hey, we can live a little longer with this shitty wire.
Readiness is first and foremost in the Marine Corps.
It is.
And the CH-53E was not ready.
It was not ready to do all the things we needed to do, that's a fact.
And what put it in the state that it was in?
I think one, we had some budget challenges inside the Department of Defense, but the money's being pulled from our Department of Defense budgets at the same time we're forward deployed and fighting. So a very challenging environment out there for sustainment.
Some people say that the cost of new weapons are constantly taking away resources from programs like the 53. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't. I think that you've got a balance. You can't fly the old metal forever. You have to keep pace with changing threat and requirements out there. You can't just say, we're just going to take care of the old and not do the new. So you have to balance that.
I agree. You do have to modernize. You have to support the fleet in being. You have to do both, but you can't get there from here doing business as usual. That's what we've been arguing about for 30 years.
Spinney was one of a small group in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill focused on military reform. Another was Pierre Sprey, who spent 20 years as a weapons analyst and designer.
The idea that we're having safety problems, we're having maintenance problems, just because the total defense budget is not big enough is ludicrous. There's plenty of money, but you can't do what's really needed for the people and buy all the glitzy toys that the Congress and the industry and the generals want. New stuff means big budgets, and new stuff means issuing contracts. And issuing contracts means that high-ranking officers and high-ranking civilians will have lovely defense industry jobs when they retire. That revolving door, that's incredibly damaging to national defense.
The problems that come with a powerful defense establishment, perpetual war, and its impact on democracy were spotted decades ago by war hero turned president, Dwight Eisenhower.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.
In his farewell address, he gave it a name.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The military-industrial complex is basically what some political scientists call an iron triangle of relationships. Those three corners being the military, the Congress, and the contractors. And how money circulates around that triangle is the key to understanding what's going on. It's basically a little bit like a bait and switch operation. You basically downplay the future costs of a new weapon. You say it'll be easy to maintain, it'll be more effective, and we estimate it's going to cost this. Then the political engineers start distributing that money as quickly as possible to as many congressional districts as possible. Then, once the true cost of the program starts to manifest itself, there's nothing you can do about it because the program's got too many vested interests spread all over the country. The F-35 is the classic case in point.
The richest contract in the history of the Pentagon, finally awarded. The aerospace company Lockheed Martin have been chosen over Boeing to build a new fighter plane for the U.S. and Britain.
As president, I've continued to make historic investments to keep our armed forces strong.
Arbitrary budget cuts have emasculated our military and harmed our ability dramatically to defend this nation.
Let's modernize. We need to respond to evolving threats.
If I'm president of the United States and Congress tries to cut the military, I will veto that in a millisecond.
We've always said we need to increase defense spending for our armed forces.
The 2-year budget agreement I just reached with Congress will provide $700 billion in defense funding this year. And next year, we will raise that number to $716 billion. That's a lot of money.
The same thing's happening again. They're just throwing money at the Pentagon. It's guaranteed to get worse. Can't get better. Because they're rewarding all the kinds of behavior that created the problem.
There is zero difference between the two political parties. None whatsoever. Because they're receiving the same money. The military-industrial complex is highly bipartisan. As long as they can keep that money flowing in the right direction, everything is smooth and hunky-dory.
That's the kind of craziness we've gotten ourselves into.
You're describing a very complex situation.
Yeah, no shit. But it's making a lot of people rich. That's the key point. A lot of people are benefiting from this lunacy. Generals are going through the revolving doors. Lieutenant colonels and colonels are going through revolving doors. Contractors are making big profits, and congressmen are basically getting lots of pork in their districts, which enables them to increase their longevity and power and wealth. Everybody wins, except, of course, the soldier at the pointy end of the spear and the taxpayer.
I love the Navy. I mean, I come from a big Navy family. There's chiefs in my family. There's master chiefs in my family. There's a lot of pride. And that's all I wanted to do, was just make everybody proud.
Chris Hummey was widely regarded as one of the top mechanics at HM-14. He was also the sailor who told Wes Van Dorn that his helicopter was safe to fly just 2 hours before the fire broke out. He battled nightmares for months. In the wake of the crash, he grew frustrated with too much business as usual.
I'm not a politician. I'm just a mechanic who saw a lot of things being done the wrong way, and I tried to voice it. And I think as a whole, that has a lot to do with me getting pushed out. I've told it politely so many times that I'm done telling it politely. Basically, I'm coming clean with, we're doing illegal maintenance. I get a message. Skipper wants to talk to you. Come in, sit down. And I realized very quickly this is not a conversation of anyone wanting to talk about the letter I wrote, other than how inappropriate the letter that I wrote was.
and I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe this. And then the one that really shocked me was the Command Master Chief recommended that I read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
The Navy questions Hummy's credibility. They say he lied about a maintenance mistake he made in the aftermath of the crash. He was disciplined for it. Later, when he took his daughter to school instead of going to a lecture about weekend behavior and personal safety, his commanding officer had grounds for dismissal. Hummy's career in the Navy was over.
You know, I just basically point blank asked him, you know, sir, has this got anything to do with a lot of the concerns I've raised, some of the issues that I know that you've talked to me about with some of my ways of approaching things? Pretty much looked me in the face and told me that I poked the bear. I poked the bear too many times, and now I've got to deal with it.
The reaction, typically of the system, is this guy is dangerous. This guy might talk to a reporter. This guy might talk to a congressman. How do we get rid of him? And then they're on him like a hawk. Every time that guy fails to tie a shoelace, he's up before a board. You can take anybody and drive him out of the service, you know, in 3 to 6 months, if you're on him like that.
Hummy moved home to Tennessee. He now works at an auto dealer.
It's certainly not the excitement of the flight line and traveling the world and, you know, all that stuff. It's a desk job in Knoxville, but I don't have to worry about, you know, towing the company line, you know, covering stuff up. Thank you for choosing Pals Knoxville. This is Chris.
When you ask why individuals can't fix this thing, most people just say it's too much of a risk. And remember also, they're conditioned culturally to put faith in the authority of the system. So even if they see something wrong, they are biased to say, maybe I just don't see the big picture. After all, he's a general and I'm just a lieutenant.
My commanding officer actually said that directly to me. He said, you just don't see the big picture. Well, my only response to that is, if the big picture is people crashing and dying and doing things the wrong way, then the big picture is wrong. A broken system killed Wes, killed Sean, killed Brian, broke Dylan. I mean, a flawed system did that.
Dylan Boone was medically separated and honorably discharged in 2015.
Scar always gets me in trouble.
The aftermath of the crash brought a series of false starts. Different jobs, different living situations, and that's on top of the 5 surgeries.
What's it like to survive a helicopter crash?
It sucks. I know there's guys who actually served in war and actually saw combat who have to deal with a lot more shit than I deal with. But when it happens in training, it's tainted. You don't expect to give up your life for this country because you were given faulty equipment.
It's as simple as the Air Crewman's Creed. Like, my country's built me the finest aircraft known to man.
I, the United States Naval Air Crewman, my country has built me the finest aircraft known to man. They have entrusted me to use it to keep our country free.
You know, like, I used to say that so loud. I was the loudest person to say it. I was ate up. I loved it.
3.5 years after the accident, Boone decided to move closer to family in California.
I'm not going to pretend that I haven't had those dark nights and struggles with PTSD. 3 volumes, medical paperwork. A lot of the time, you know, I'd get a surgery and just get Oxycontin or Valium or Percocets. And it was a concoction of coping with physical ailments and mental instability, fueled by alcohol and prescription drugs. They take all the pain away, not just your physical pain, but you don't think about anything and you really don't care. Lowest low. I don't know if I even want to answer that because I'll sound fucking crazy. Lowest low. Gun in hand. Yeah, lowest low, gun to hand, gun in hand. Lowest low, gun in hand, barrel to head. But you know, it's like you kind of get to that point and you never know if you're actually going to do it or not. And then you don't, and you're done with the idea. Sometimes it's just a bad day and things continue to roll downhill. Sometimes it's really hard to find the reason for why things happen. And sometimes it feels like you're damn near close to breaking.
I think all of the platforms we've had in the United States Marine Corps, the legacy platforms, had a bit of a readiness challenge, a severe readiness challenge. And it manifested itself in about 2014. I looked at the 53 as being one that was more challenged than some of the others. What I didn't understand early on is how to fix the problem. Right now, the world is a pretty dangerous place. And we got Marines forward deployed at sea and ashore.
Davis had a dilemma. He had Marines in Afghanistan and the Middle East dependent on the 53, and he had concerns about the condition of the helicopters. He ordered a study of his 53s in order to figure out how to get the fleet back on track. The report found that less than a quarter of the helicopters were mission capable, far below the Pentagon's requirements. It recommended a complete overhaul, a reset of the 53 fleet.
What took so long?
I don't know. I just, I can't answer that question. I can only answer the questions that I dealt with when I got there.
7 months after the report was complete, the 53's troubling legacy continued. At a 53 squadron in Hawaii, so few aircraft were available, Marines considered the flight schedule a running joke. But on a night in January 2016, 12 Marines boarded 2 helicopters for a training exercise. Tourists took in luau's. Security cameras kept watch on vacation homes. One spotted the choppers just offshore and captured the moment they collided in midair. All 12 Marines were killed instantly. The death toll on the 53E climbed to 128.
That's terrible. And I think, you know, it's, again, I'm heartbroken that we lose these fine Marines in a mishap like this.
The 4 pilots had barely flown in the months leading up to the accident.
Were they pushed to do something they weren't ready to do?
I don't want to go into that particular mishap, but I think there's no reason that those 2 airplanes should have had a collision.
You know, the fact that a guy has a collision and you can obviously blame it on pilot error doesn't really mean much if the guy's not getting practice. It's an easy way to deflect the blame.
Captain Kennedy! Captain Brian Kennedy! Captain Brian T. Kennedy!
One of the pilots, Brian Kennedy, was one of Wes Van Dorn's best friends at the Naval Academy.
When we found out that Brian had also died in a helicopter crash, it's devastating all over again.
I went to Brian Kennedy's wedding less than a year ago. And then I went to the same town and went to his funeral.
When is it going to be enough? How many people have to die? I'm appalled and I'm devastated, but there's a lack of surprise. Something was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't know exactly what it was going to look like.
Kennedy's name was inscribed below that of his friend at the Naval Academy's Memorial Hall. They are the only 2 members of their class to die in service, not in battle, but training in an aged helicopter.
If you join the military, you inherently know that at some point in time, you might die doing your job just because of what you've chosen to do. But that does not leave a blank allowance for the Navy to kill you. Not everybody that died for this country had to die for this country.
We're looking at every single wire. All the zip ties that were in here is coming off. Every piece of tape you see is a repair we're making. It's 800 and something gripes just on this airframe. This thing's a workhorse, and it's going to continue to be a workhorse until the kilo hits the fleet.
been another tragic week for U.S. military aviation. 5 service members have died, and the accidents are continuing.
The number of accidents involving manned military aircraft between 2013 and 2017 spiked 40%. 40%.
I would reject wave and crisis. Those are mishaps that occurred. Each one is tragic. We regret each one. We'll look at them carefully. I'm certainly not prepared to say that it's a wave of mishaps or some form of crisis. No, I'm not prepared to say that.
If it's not a wave, if it's not a crisis, how do you explain it, General?
And I understand some of you, really great pilots, could use some new CH-53s. Is that a correct statement? You want to see some new ones? Huh?
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.